I just finished watching They Cloned Tyrone, and let me tell you, that movie was amazing. It was awesome. I laughed. It kept me intrigued. I like the the mystery behind it. But I had to come down to the Glen neighborhood and see what was going on myself. But while I'm walking down here, I'm gonna tell you my thoughts and like the little things that I loved and the things that I didn't like about the movie. So let's go. Walk with me. So the movie starts with a giant billboard of a white man staring down over a liquor store that have a group of men standing outside talking about Michael Jackson and his skin color. And then you see a little boy riding a pass on his bicycle asking them if they seen Fontaine. Now, Fontaine is the character played by John Boyega. And this is when we're first introduced. So when the little boy finally meets or finds Fontaine, um, we soon learn that Fontaine is a very serious character. You know, he seems like he's been through some hardships. He's from the streets. He don't really talk too much. He just seems very off to himself. So that's our first introduction on Fontaine, just a character that seems like he's just been through a lot and just wants to stay out of trouble. So the little boy meets up with Fontaine and tells Fontaine that he knows where this guy that he's looking for with his money. So Fontaine goes, runs the guy over with his car, breaking his leg, taking like little cash that he has on him, and I'm realizing that it's not enough. So at that point, we learn that Fontaine is a dope boy, drug dealer in the Glen neighborhood. So after this incident, we see Fontaine go back to his house and fix a sandwich, and he knocks on the door, asks his mom if she's hungry, and she declines and says that she already ate because they had a fish fry in the neighborhood. And then we see one of his street dealers come in to bring him his money in a pizza box, and Fontaine realizes he's short. He asks his bookie, like, where's the rest of my money? And that's when we're introduced to Slick Charles, which is played by Jamie Foxx. So at this point, Fontaine shows up at Slick Charles's place looking for the rest of his money. And this is where we're also introduced to Yo-Yo, played by the character Tiana Paris. So this is where everything kind of takes off. So the guy that Fontaine hit at the beginning of the film shows up as Fontaine is getting back in his vehicle to leave Slick Charles's place, and they retaliate and shoots up his car, unaliving him in his driver's seat. So Slick Charles sees him unalived in his car and goes back inside because he's like, I don't want no parts of this. I don't know what's going on. You know, basically, I think Slick Charles felt relieved because now he doesn't have to pay him. But this is where everything kind of takes off and things start to get a little bit eerie and interesting and intriguing all at the same time. And the comedic timing and jabs from Jamie was so on time, and I loved it. So after Fontaine is unalive, we see him wake back up in his home, do the same routine, fix a sandwich, go knock on his mother's door, ask her if she's hungry. She says no. And then he leaves the house and goes back over to Slick Charles' place, in which Slick Charles freaks out and is like, what are you doing here? How is this happening? You know, I just saw you unalive yesterday. You can't be real. And then he takes Fontaine to Yo-Yo to validate his story of him being unalive. And then from that point, she confirms it. And then they try to figure out what the heck is going on. How did he come back to life? Is this a joke or what? So at this point, we all are like, okay, what's going on? You know, was it a dream? You know, did it actually happen? I was confused too. So I'm like all intrigued, trying to figure out, okay, so is this Tyrone? Like, what's going on? Like, at this point, we haven't seen Tyrone. We only seen Fontaine, Slick Charles, and Yo-Yo. Now that everyone is aware that something weird is going on, they seek out to discover like what is happening in their town. So from this point forward, we start to find out that there's this science lab underground built by the U.S. government where they're experimenting on people from the community creating clones. And we learned that they're using staples in the Black community, such as churches, fast food restaurants, and the liquor store as their underground stations or as the ports to go underground. And we learned that that the government, they've been watching over this neighborhood, taking notes and stealing people off the streets and cloning them unbeknownst to them. And we soon learned that they're also subjecting us to chemicals in our food, in our hair products, also the things that we watch on TV, the music frequencies. We're learning that the entire Glen neighborhood is one big giant experiment, basically for the white society, and a Yo-Yo, Fontaine, and Slick Charles are basically test subjects inside this underground compound. So after the crew finds out that they're being cloned, Yo-Yo questioned why wasn't she cloned, and the scientists revealed to her that she comes a dime a dozen, and there was no need to clone her. But key players in the community, like Slick Charles and Fontaine, from the prostitution and the drug dealing, they were long-term figures that they needed to keep around in the community to help them continuously destroy it. And as far as Yo-Yo character, she was just like a pawn used by Slick Charles, but Slick Charles was the one with the actual power. Fontaine eventually runs into his creator, and we learn that Fontaine was created in his likeness because he wanted to assimilate the Black people in the community into white people. And that's why some of the white characters that we saw previously only had afros with fair skin. And he spoke of that being an issue with his experimentation, was trying to get the hair to match the skin tone. So we learned at that point also Fontaine is a clone, and everything that he has experienced in his life was all fake and fabricated and created by his creator, the OG, Fontaine. Once Fontaine learns that the creator is trying to assimilate the people in the Glen neighborhood to white clones of themselves, he figures that like he needs to put a stop to it. But it made me wonder, like, is this the type of things that is really happening? You know, is this assimilation of the mixture of culture, of the erasure of bloodlines? Is this the ultimate plan, is for us to assimilate and for everybody to be the same? I don't know, but it also makes you wonder, like, are they really putting chemicals in our food? You know, like, what else is going on? Like a lot of things are in open plain sight, and we just walk around every day just blind to it. But I just wonder what you think about that. But this movie really made me think. So as the movie comes to an end, the whole town of Glen come together and defeat all the scientists and the doctors below in the compound and release all the clones onto the street. And then we see at the very end, we see Fontaine wake up, but then we see it go into a television, and we see a group of guys on the sofa watching the news, talking about the clones and what's going on in Glen. But then we see another Fontaine lookalike sitting on the sofa, and a guy says, "Tyrone, is that you?" And that is the first time that we actually hear the name Tyrone. And the movie is titled They Cloned Tyrone. And throughout the entire movie, I was wondering who was Tyrone. They was calling Fontaine and then the doctor a different name. It was like, okay, where is this Tyrone? Who is this Tyrone they cloned? And then at the very end of the movie, before it goes off, Tyrone gets asked a question. I'm like, oh, so that's Tyrone. So that was basically like the gist of the entire movie. But a lot of the gems that were dropped throughout this was the fact that a lot of the Black communities are being surveilled by the dominant society, like the government, white people. We're studied because Black people are the culture. They are the cool to a lot of things and like the ingenuity. And not only that, it's the chemicals in the food, like to keep Black people in a fog state of mind, to keep them angry or in this jolly state that's very lackadaisical, where they don't really care about the future. They just care about the moment, having fun. And it just makes you ponder, like, what is really going on in these communities, and if you are playing a part of the dominant society as far as just helping them perpetuate the stereotype of Black people. And then we also came to realize, like, there's a Fontaine in every city, in every state, and it just makes you wonder, do you have a doppelganger somewhere? Are you cloned? Is the life that you live actually real? I don't know, but tell me what you guys think below about They Cloned Tyrone. I loved it. I thought it was cool and funny, and it made you really analyze and use your brain throughout the movie to figure out what was going on. I enjoyed it. 5 stars.